Hello, BookTube. It's Friday, and that's time for Friday Reads. Ordinarily, when I do these videos, I would bombard you with all the new releases that I'm going to read today and this weekend, but I'm not doing that today because I'm not reading any 2020 releases, and there are only a few more days left in this year. So everything I'm going to show you, book-wise, is rereads. And then there's a periodical, and then we'll do a little mail and see if maybe that changes the equation any. The periodical is something a lot of you will know as the Raritan Review. It's Raritan, and it's a quarterly thing. It's packed with stuff. There's lots of poetry that I used to ignore. Now, thanks to you, thanks to this channel, thanks to Poetry Tuesday, I don't ignore the poetry anymore. Don't confess to understand a lot of it or to like a lot of it, but I at least read it with what I think is greater critical attention than I had before 2019. And then I read all the other stuff as well. There are long essays here, and some translations. There's a translation here of a bit of what is it called? The Infinite Thread by Paulo Rumiz, which I don't think has a complete translation in English yet. No, it was a hit. In which he studies the fractured state of Europe and Brexit through the lens of Benedictine abbeys. And I read the introduction to the opening part of that in here in a translation. That was interesting. And Christopher Ermshire, who's a biographer, an American historian that I just love, he has a piece in here. And there are also book reviews, longer book considerations in here. That's a large part of the book, large part of the magazine. So that is all new, and it's almost like a book. So I'm pouring my way through that and taking my time, and then we get to the books. And one of the books we just saw recently, it's a reread for me, but never in one book. So a lot of these pieces are new to me. A lot of these pieces are so old as to be new to me, and some of them appeared in Raritan originally. This is Prepared for the Worst by Christopher Hitchens, a collection of literary essays and political essays that I'm reading it and enjoying quite a bit. He's an awful front-loaded author. He definitely doesn't want a sentence to pass unmolested, and that gets a little tiresome. And it shows his literary antecedents. It shows who he learned his craft from, because you only ever learn that by imitating it, and it's not always a healthy thing to imitate, but always very stimulating, always very, very good. Then this next one is also a reread. These are all rereads. This is from 2018. It's by Gary MacDonald, and it's The Gospel of Thomas the Younger. It's a slim thing, sort of New Testament pastiche novel about the reminiscences of the very earliest years of Jesus and the very earliest years of Christianity by Jesus' nephew, Thomas the Younger. And I don't know if I can convey. I really liked this when I read it the first time. I want to show you the author's gimmick. Yes, there we go. We have the main text of the book is the Gospel of Thomas the Younger, and from that we see Jesus and his real world ministry and his apostles and the years of the Roman Empire during the whole time, Nero and Vespasian and Titus and the siege of Jerusalem and all that, and Josephus, all those real-world historical characters make appearances in here. And alongside that, the author keeps up a narrative in the footnotes that is basically a tutorial of early Christianity, its beliefs and its historiography. The footnotes comment on the Gospel of Thomas the Younger as it unfolds, as if it were a real thing, and that makes it all just fascinating. I thought it was just a feast when I read it the first time back 2 years ago, and now I'm going to reread it and see if it holds up to scrutiny. And then this next one, this is also a reread. We saw it on this channel. We've seen a few of these things on this channel. This is Bright Young Dead by Jessica Fellows, and it is a murder mystery starring the Mitford girls, starring the Mitford sisters. I believe this is the second one. I think the first one was the Mitford Murders. Let me double check since I've got you right here. Yeah, the Mitford Murders was the first one. Bright Young Dead is the second one. The title is a reference to a a brief cultural phenomenon at the early part of the 20th century of bright young things that was always meant in sarcasm, but I read this when it first came out. I read The Mitford Murders when it first came out and could not believe that anyone could seriously propose the Mitford sisters as crime-solving sleuths. But I guess if cats can solve crimes, and we all know that cats wouldn't care, then the Mitford sisters can. And really, this gives Jesse Fellows a chance to describe the era and the people. These are, I mean, the murder plots are fairly well constructed, I guess. I don't think they'd get very high marks in a tutorial by Britta, but they're fairly well constructed. But the main point of the novel, the main point of this whole series, is to bring the Mitfords, their world, their society, to life, and I think it does a really good job of that. So I read this when it first came out in hardcover, and I'm going to reread it in paperback. Then this next one I reread this morning, and I really need to reinforce it because it's a UK trade paperback. It's not going to last if I don't reinforce it. I don't need it in any other format. I might as well keep it in this. This is pretty enough. This is Gay Dailies' Pre-Raphaelites in Love, which I found at the Brattle Bookshop, I believe, in 2019. I'd read it before a couple of times. I am fascinated by the Pre-Raphaelites, and this is I think the best book that I've ever read on them, in not just in terms of eloquence, its own eloquence, but also just in terms of its fun. The Pre-Raphaelites in their public facing, as we say nowadays, artistic personas, took themselves so incredibly seriously. And this author realizes and plays to the hilt the fact that in private they didn't take themselves all that seriously. And as a result, this is actually a fun book to read on the Pre-Raphaelites, which not a lot of people would credit, nevertheless. But I really need to. This has schmutz on the cover, and it's holding up. It held up fairly well to a reread, but I know I'm going to want to reread this again. I know I am. So I really ought to reinforce it. I will do that. Then this next one isn't really a book either. I guess it is. It's an old style combination, a hybrid of a square-bound magazine like Raritan and a cheap mass-market paperback. This is L. Sprague de Camp's also funny book, Lest Darkness Fall. I have no idea what this cover is. I have no idea what's going on that cover. But this is a story of a man from the 20th century who travels back to ye olden times, to Roman times, to the fall of Rome, and conceives the idea that maybe his desultory knowledge of the present day and modern technology might allow him to forestall the fall of the Roman Empire. And I read this as a mass market paperback with I believe a Michael Whelan cover, or Darrell K. Sweet, one of those two did a cover with a trebuchet and all, and it has ongoing bits of physical comedy and tons of great moments, great scenes. It's a minor cult classic, I think, as close as L. Sprague de Camp ever came to creating a classic without using Robert E. Howard. Although there's a clear, affectionate homage to Robert E. Howard's world in here, in the presence of a hulking barbarian. And this is well, these were once called Galaxy novels, and put out by Galaxy magazine, I believe. This is number 24 and came out in 1949. No idea. I can't quite remember off the top of my head why I have it in this form. It might have been a gift from Mark Richardson, or maybe I found in one of our used book outings up in Vermont. But one way or another, I haven't read it in this form, and I don't have my mass market anymore. And I don't have anything else. Don't have any other format. So I just have this. We'll see. L. Sprague de Camp often doesn't survive rereading for me. Often the prose creaks really bad. Too bad to ignore. We will see if it does this time around. And then the last of the books that I want to show you before we open mail, we'll see if the mail changes anything, is what I consider to be the signature book of 2019, the most important thing and the most maddening thing published in book form in 2019, and that is the Mueller Report. Those of you who don't closely follow American politics will only distantly have heard of this thing, but this was a special prosecutor who investigated the possibility of collusion with a foreign power during the 2016 presidential election on the part of the Trump campaign. And it's maddening. I read the whole thing a couple of times. I studied it as I did every other document like this that comes down the pike. These are ours. The Washington Post decided to slap an introduction on this and make money out of it, but this is yours to read for free. And if you're an American, it's yours to read for free, although it's maddening because Robert Mueller and his team refused to acknowledge the real world around them, which is something you expect legendarily hard-hitting lawyers to do. And instead, they steadily refused to acknowledge the real world around them. So the report comes out by saying, one of the conclusions of the report is that they found no direct evidence of direct and active coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians to win the election, when that direct evidence is in the news and was admitted in public by the Trump administration and by the Trump campaign. And there's this impenetrable partition, this gentleman's partition between what they could prove with court documents and what the subject of their investigation were saying on the news. And that was just one of the frustrations here. The other frustration, far more than that, is that there's some stupid, arcane policy by the Department of Justice that they will not indict a sitting president. And so Robert Mueller's Mueller report does not indict Donald Trump, even though the report, you can barely, I mean this without exaggeration, you can barely open it at random without finding an instance in which the President of the United States is either breaking the law or ordering someone else to break the law. It is a fundamental disjunction between Mueller's old-school, button-down, GI rule-oriented world and the real world around him every day while he was compiling this report. It's a fundamental disjunction between those two things. And as a result, Robert Mueller, who is a loyal and sacrificed American, betrayed his country by refusing to acknowledge in the course of this report that 2 and 2 equals 4. Instead, he showed you 2, he showed you the other 2, he added them together, he gave you the equals sign, and then he handed the whole thing to a Congress he already knew was both inept and corrupt, to say, well, I've done everything I have to do legally by law, and I've adjusted my tie, and I'm the only person left who uses Brill cream, and now I will go home to my loving wife of 50 years and my war records in the cabinet by the TV. And it'll be up to you to actually do the math. I've given you the 2, I've given you the other 2, I've given you the equal sign. All that's left for you to do is draw the conclusion and indict the president. But I can't do that because there's a law that we made up on the fly out of nothing a few years ago. It's not even a law. It's just a gentleman's agreement that we won't do that. As you can tell, this infuriated me when I read it the first time. It infuriated me even without Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Bill Barr, who is also, coincidentally, but it doesn't affect his real job, Attorney General of the United States, who intentionally got a précis of this report early and made a press conference in which he lied about its contents in order to spin it in favor of the criminal president that he represents. Now, he's never been retained by Donald Trump. He's retained by the American people. He's your lawyer, if you're an American. But that's not his job. That's not the job he auditioned for on TV. That's not the job he's ever done. And the worst thing that an American has done in the last 30 or 40 years has been what he did with that press conference, to go in front of cameras and lie to the American people to get ahead of this story. No other reason. He knows he was lying. He's a lawyer. He can read legal documents. He knows perfectly well that he was mischaracterizing everything that's in here. This is full of crimes. This is as damning a description of a criminal president as I have read in 40 years. But I've only read it the one time. I read excerpts, of course, all over the news. I read tons and tons of analysis, but I only went through it. I read large chunks of it more than once. But going through it from front to back, I want to do again before the end of the year, because this is 2019 in a book. So I'm going to do that. And that little pile there, we've got the Mueller Report, we've got the latest Raritan Review, we've got the Gospel of Thomas the Younger, we've got Preparing for the Worst by a very young Christopher Hitchens, Bright Young Dead by Jessica Fellows about the Mitford sisters. We've got Pre-Raphaelites in Love, a classic. We've got Lest Darkness Fall. So that is Friday Reads, a mishmash of things that will please me, soothe me, anger me. But we've also got a couple of packages. So we'll see. Let's see if anything in these packages changes that. Maybe one of the things in these two packages will be so compelling that I won't feel the need to reread the Mueller Report. That would be great. Okay, this is a January release. This is by Serena Burdick, and it is The Girls with No Names. So it's January, so it doesn't affect the math here. It was awarded the 2017 International Book Award in Historical Fiction for... this author was awarded that prize for her debut, Girl in the Afternoon. And this is her second novel. A sweeping narrative with deeply empathetic characters set in 1913 New York City. The novel centers on the fierce bonds of female friendship and harrowing lengths that sisters will go to help each other when they need it most. This atmospheric portrait of old New York vividly describes iconic events like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and is based on the real House of Mercy, a home for wayward girls in Manhattan's Inwood Hill Park, featuring stories of the real girls who lived there. Okay. Well, so the author has already won praise for her debut, and this is the second book, which comes out in January. All right, so historical fiction. We'll see what we do when we get to it, but doesn't change things now. This next one is huge. It's a gigantic thing. Okay. All right, fantastic. I'm glad to have this, but it doesn't affect the math either. It's wow. Okay. I can't remember if we saw this already. We might have. This comes out in early March. It's a huge thing. It's going to get reviewed everywhere. This is by Gerald Posner. We've seen him in this room. He did a Kennedy book. And this is Pharma. This is his new book, Pharma. Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America. All about the pharmaceutical industry. Which brings to life the heroes and villains of the pharmaceutical industry and reveals how a business meant to save lives is steeped in corruption and reckless profiteering with deadly consequences. Look at the size of this thing. Almost 5 years in researching, Gerald received a treasure trove of documents from an anonymous sender. These documents, complete with never-before-seen information, help provide answers to long-standing questions. With new information, coupled with Gerald's dogged reporting, Pharma is set apart from all books on this subject. It's supremely comprehensive and ambitious in scope. It is also the first ever attempt to capture a full history of the modern American pharmaceutical industry. Okay, well, this author, everybody takes him seriously anyway, and this is a major book. And it comes out in March. The American presidential season will be in full swing in March. Okay, great. Well, that's great. That's fantastic, those two. But especially Pharma, that's going to be a big release. But they don't change the math. so it's going to be these things. It's going to be this stack of books. The Mueller Report, classic science fiction, some history, some classic mystery, a little bit of my own profession, the bits and pieces of Raritan, the latest issue that I haven't read yet. So that's my Friday reads. And as usual, this will be my last Friday reads of the year. And as usual, I want to know what you're doing, what you're reading on Friday. Mine is just a mishmash with nothing really new, because I'm done with new releases for the rest of the year. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.